The stars disappeared. One moment they twinkled in Earth's night sky. The next moment a wall of metal blocked them out. Ships. Thousands upon thousands of ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They stretched across space like a dark blanket, turning day into night on half the planet. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observatory window in Geneva. She was the head of Earth's deep space monitoring program, and she had never seen anything like this. The alien fleet was so massive that their computers couldn't count all the ships. Every few seconds, more vessels appeared from behind the larger ones. "How many?" asked Director Martinez, standing behind her with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "We stopped counting at 50,000, Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. "There could be 100,000, maybe more." On every continent, people stared up at the sky. Children pointed at the darkness where stars used to shine. News reporters struggled to find words. Military leaders held emergency meetings. Religious figures prayed. Scientists tried to understand what they were seeing. Then the message came. It arrived on every radio frequency, every television channel, every computer screen, and every phone on the planet. The voice spoke in perfect English, but somehow everyone heard it in their own language. The words were cold, mechanical, without emotion. "People of the third planet, you will listen. You will understand. You will obey," the voice paused. Around the world, 7 billion people held their breath. "We are the Kethmoran Empire. We rule 847 star systems. We command fleets that span 3 arms of this galaxy. We have conquered worlds beyond your ability to count." Sarah watched as her instruments detected massive energy readings from the alien fleet. Whatever technology they possessed, it was far beyond human understanding. "Your planet will surrender. Your governments will submit to imperial rule. Your people will serve the Empire. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a command." In the United Nations building in New York, representatives from every nation sat in stunned silence. President Williams of the United States gripped her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Premier Li of China stared at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the alien ships above. Prime Minister Okafor of Nigeria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The alien voice continued. "You have 7 of your solar rotations to comply. 7 days. After this time, if you have not surrendered, your planet will be cleansed. Your cities will burn. Your people will die. This is the way of the Empire. This is the fate of all who resist." The transmission ended. For several seconds, the only sound in the UN building was the hum of air conditioning. Then President Williams stood up. "Well," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, "I guess we need to talk." The next 6 days were unlike anything in human history. Every government on Earth held emergency sessions. Military leaders from different countries shared information they had kept secret for decades. Scientists worked around the clock to understand the alien technology. Religious leaders of all faiths tried to help their people find hope. But something unexpected happened during those 6 days. Instead of panic, instead of surrender, something else grew in the hearts of humanity. It started small in online forums and social media posts. It spread to coffee shops and street corners, to school playgrounds and nursing homes. People began to get angry. Marcus Rivera was a construction worker in Mexico City. He had a wife and 2 young daughters. When the aliens first appeared, he was scared. He wanted to keep his family safe. But as the days passed, as he watched his daughters play in the shadow of the alien fleet, something changed inside him. "They think they can just show up and take our world?" he said to his wife Elena as they watched the evening news. "They think we'll just roll over because they have big ships?" Elena nodded. She was thinking the same thing. "This is our home, Marcus. Our children's home." Similar conversations happened in every city and every town, in every village on Earth. A farmer in India looked at his fields and thought about his grandfather, who had fought for independence from the British Empire. A teacher in Nigeria remembered the stories her grandmother told about resisting colonization. A fisherman in Japan thought about his ancestors who had faced tsunamis and earthquakes but never gave up. By the 6th day, something remarkable had happened. The world's governments had made their decision, but it wasn't the leaders who made it. It was the people. Phone calls flooded government offices. Emails crashed servers. People gathered in the streets not to panic or flee, but to say the same thing over and over. No. In the United Nations building, Secretary General Nakamura looked at the reports from around the world. Every government had received the same message from their people. The same word in hundreds of languages, no. They won't surrender, she told the assembled representatives. Our people won't surrender. President Williams nodded. Then we make it official. The response was recorded in the same UN building where the alien message had been received. It was simple, direct, and spoke for all of humanity. To the Keth Moran Empire, President Williams began, reading from a statement written by representatives of every nation on Earth. We have heard your demands. We understand your threats. We know you have powerful ships and advanced technology. She paused, looking directly into the camera that would broadcast this message to the alien fleet. Our answer is no. Earth will not surrender. Humanity will not bow. This is our world, and if you want it, you'll have to take it from us. We may not have your technology, but we have something you clearly don't understand. We have the right to be free, and we will fight for that right. The message was transmitted to the alien fleet. The response came within an hour. It wasn't words this time. It was action. Sarah Chen was still at the observatory when it happened. Her instruments detected massive energy discharges from the alien fleet. She watched in horror as beams of incredible power struck Earth's moon. The moon's surface exploded. Nuclear fire spread across the lunar landscape. Chunks of rock the size of mountains were blown into space. The explosion was so bright it could be seen during the day, so powerful it shook the Earth's oceans. It was a demonstration. A message. This is what happens to those who defy the Empire. Within minutes, communication channels across Earth were flooded with a single response. It came from government leaders and ordinary citizens, from soldiers and teachers, from children and grandparents. It was broadcast on every frequency, posted on every website, shouted from every rooftop. You just made this personal. Marcus Rivera stood in his backyard, looking up at the burning moon with his wife and daughters beside him. His youngest daughter, only 5 years old, tugged on his shirt. Papa, she said, are the bad aliens going to hurt us? Marcus knelt down and looked into his daughter's eyes. He thought about the construction sites where he had worked, where men and women had built things that would last for generations. He thought about his grandfather who had told him stories about standing up to bullies. They're going to try, Mija, he said softly, but we're not going to let them. Around the world, similar conversations were happening. Parents talking to children, teachers talking to students, friends talking to friends, and in every conversation, the message was the same. The aliens had made a mistake. They had threatened humanity's home, and now they were going to learn what that really meant. The 7 days were up. The deadline had passed. Earth had not surrendered. The war was about to begin. Admiral Korthax had conquered 43 worlds in his military career. He knew exactly how this would work. First, orbital bombardment would destroy the major population centers. Then ground forces would land to establish control points. Within 3 standard days, local leaders would surrender to save whatever remained of their people. He had done this so many times that his officers could predict his every move. The Admiral believed humans would be no different from any other species. They were primitive, barely capable of space travel, armed with crude nuclear weapons. Their resistance would collapse quickly once they saw the true power of the Empire. Begin bombardment of primary population centers, Admiral Korthax commanded from his flagship. Standard intimidation pattern. Target their largest cities first. The Imperial fleet opened fire. Energy beams that could crack continents struck New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Mumbai, Lagos, São Paulo, and a dozen other major cities. The Admiral expected to see massive explosions, burning ruins, and millions of casualties. Instead, he saw something impossible. The cities didn't explode. They didn't burn. They didn't collapse, sir. His weapons officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. The energy is being absorbed into the planetary surface. Our scans show the humans have built massive underground networks beneath every major population center. Admiral Korthax studied the tactical displays. What his sensors showed made no sense. The humans had spent decades building underground cities beneath their surface cities. When the bombardment began, entire populations simply disappeared underground through thousands of hidden entrances. How was this possible? The Admiral demanded. Our intelligence reports showed no such construction. Sir, his intelligence officer replied nervously, it appears they've been preparing for exactly this scenario for the past 50 Earth years. Every major population center has underground levels that extend hundreds of meters down. they've been building while pretending to live normal lives on the surface. In New York, Maria Santos led her neighbors through tunnels that connected to an underground complex beneath Central Park. She was a school teacher, not a soldier, but she had trained for this day since she was a teenager. Every citizen of every major city had trained for this day. Remember, she called to the families following her, stay calm, stay together, and trust the system. We built this together. We'll survive this together. The underground cities weren't just shelters. They were fortresses. The humans had learned from every war in their history, every siege, every battle. They had designed these complexes to be completely self-sufficient. Food, water, air, power, communications, manufacturing capabilities, and weapon storage. Everything needed to survive a long siege. Admiral Korthax ordered ground forces to land. Surely once his troops were on the surface, the humans would be forced to emerge and fight conventionally. No species could remain underground forever. The first Imperial dropships landed in what had once been downtown Los Angeles. The city appeared empty, abandoned. The Kethmoran soldiers, tall reptilian beings with advanced armor and energy weapons, moved through empty streets with confidence. Then the streets exploded. The humans had turned their own infrastructure into weapons. Roads, buildings, bridges, tunnels, everything had been rigged with explosives. But these weren't random bombs. They were carefully planned traps designed to channel the alien soldiers into kill zones. Commander Veltar led the first ground assault team. He had fought in 30 campaigns and had never encountered anything like this. The humans seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His soldiers would enter a building only to have it collapse on top of them. They would advance down a street, only to find it was a carefully designed funnel that led to a wall of human weapons fire. "Where are their warriors?" Veltar demanded over the communication system. "Where are their soldiers?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A small human child, perhaps 10 years old, appeared on a rooftop, carrying a weapon that should have been too heavy for her to lift. She fired a rocket that destroyed 2 Imperial vehicles before disappearing back into the building. "Sir," one of his soldiers reported, "we're not fighting their military. We're fighting their entire population." This was the humans' first lesson for their invaders. On Earth, there was no difference between soldiers and civilians. Every human was a potential fighter. Children as young as 8 operated communication systems that coordinated attacks. Elderly humans in their 80s piloted explosive-laden vehicles into Imperial positions. Teenagers built weapons in hidden factories. Parents taught their children how to fight while teaching them mathematics. In Chicago, Dr. Patricia Wong was a heart surgeon who had spent 20 years saving lives. Now she spent her days teaching neighborhood children how to make improvised explosives from household chemicals. She had never imagined she would become a weapons instructor, but the invasion had changed everyone. "The aliens wear armor," she explained to a group of teenagers in an underground classroom. "But armor has joints and joints have weaknesses. You don't need to overpower them. You need to outsmart them." The Imperial forces discovered that humans fought with a combination of advanced planning and primitive brutality that their military algorithms couldn't process. The humans used farm equipment as mobile artillery. They turned construction vehicles into armored fighting machines. They weaponized everything from kitchen knives to industrial chemicals. Most disturbing to the Kethmorans was the human attitude toward death. In every other species they had conquered, the threat of death was enough to ensure surrender. But humans seemed to view their own deaths not as defeat, but as tactical advantages. Captain Thexmore watched in shock as a human female deliberately triggered an explosion that killed both herself and 6 Imperial soldiers. Her last words, broadcast on all frequencies, were, "Make them pay for every step." "They're using suicide attacks," he reported to Commander Veltar. "But not out of desperation. They're doing it strategically, to maximize damage to our forces." The humans had learned something from their long history of warfare that the Empire had never encountered. They understood that sometimes the best way to win a war was to make it too expensive for the enemy to continue fighting. By the end of the first week, Imperial forces controlled less than 5% of Earth's surface. Worse, they were losing soldiers at a rate that shocked the Empire's military planners. The humans were inflicting casualties not through superior technology, but through superior tactics and unlimited determination. Admiral Korthax reviewed the battle reports with growing unease. The humans were proving to be unlike any enemy the Empire had ever faced. They didn't fight to win battles. They fought to win the war. Every engagement was designed not to defeat Imperial forces, but to teach them that occupying Earth would cost more than the Empire was willing to pay. In Detroit, a city that had been rebuilding itself for decades, factory workers turned automobile production lines into weapons manufacturing centers. They built armored vehicles from car parts and industrial machinery. These weren't sophisticated weapons, but they were effective weapons, designed by people who understood how to make things work under impossible conditions. Tommy Washington was a line supervisor who had spent 30 years building cars. Now he supervised the production of armored personnel carriers for the human resistance. The vehicles were crude compared to Imperial technology, but they were reliable, easy to repair, and perfectly suited for urban warfare. "We don't need to make them perfect," Tommy told his workers. "We just need to make them work. The aliens have better technology, but we understand our technology. We can fix it, modify it, and improve it in ways they can't predict." The human resistance was learning and adapting faster than the Empire could respond. Captured Imperial weapons were reverse-engineered within days and used against their creators. Imperial communication frequencies were hacked and filled with human propaganda. Even more disturbing, the humans seemed to be studying Imperial tactics and developing countermeasures in real time. Commander Veltar found himself fighting an enemy that learned from every encounter. The humans would try a tactic, see how the Imperial forces responded, then develop a counter-response within hours. It was as if the entire human population was engaged in a massive, real-time military research project. "They're treating this war as an experiment," he reported to Admiral Korthax. "They're not trying to defeat us quickly. They're trying to learn everything about how we fight so they can develop better ways to resist us." The Admiral reviewed the tactical reports with growing concern. The Empire had protocols for defeating superior technology, greater numbers, and advanced civilizations. But they had no protocols for dealing with an entire species that treated warfare as a science to be perfected, rather than a problem to be solved quickly. After 2 weeks of ground combat, Imperial forces controlled less territory than when they had started. The humans had turned every city, every town, every village into a fortress. They fought from sewers, subway tunnels, shopping centers, schools, churches, and homes. There was no front line because everywhere was the front line. Admiral Korthax made the decision that would change everything. 3 months had passed since the invasion began. Admiral Korthax stared at the tactical displays in his command center with growing disbelief. His forces now controlled less than 20% of Earth's surface, and even that control was questionable. The humans seemed capable of launching attacks from anywhere at any time. Worse, the resistance had spread beyond Earth itself. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported nervously, "we're detecting human activity throughout their solar system. They've been building hidden bases on asteroids, moons, and what they call space stations for decades." The Admiral studied the new intelligence reports. Humans had been secretly militarizing their entire solar system while pretending to be a peaceful, barely spacefaring species. Jupiter's moons housed massive railgun installations that could launch projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Saturn's rings hid thousands of automated mines that moved like living creatures, tracking Imperial ships and attacking without warning. But most shocking was Mars, the red planet, which Imperial surveys had dismissed as a lifeless rock, turned out to be humanity's primary military manufacturing center. Hidden beneath the planet's surface were factories that had been producing weapons, ships, and military equipment for 50 years. "How did we miss this?" Admiral Korthax demanded. "Sir," his intelligence officer replied, "they hid everything underground and disguised their activities as scientific research. Every research station was actually a military facility. Every scientific mission was actually a military operation." Captain Sarah Chen, the same scientist who had first detected the Imperial fleet, now commanded a fusion-powered missile ship hidden in the asteroid belt. Her vessel was little more than engines strapped to nuclear warheads, but it was fast, hard to detect, and completely expendable. "Remember," she broadcast to the other ships in her squadron, "we're not trying to win a space battle. We're trying to make them afraid to leave their big ships. Every supply run they make, every scouting mission they send out, has to cost them something." The human space forces fought like their ground forces, not to win decisive victories, but to make the war too expensive to continue. They launched suicide attacks against Imperial supply ships. They planted mines in shipping routes. They turned asteroids into guided missiles, using crude fusion drives to accelerate massive rocks toward Imperial vessels. The tactics horrified Imperial commanders who were used to civilized warfare between military professionals. The humans treated their entire solar system as a weapon to be used against invaders. On Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons, construction engineer Jake Morrison supervised the loading of a railgun that was the size of a city block. The weapon could launch a tungsten rod at 20% of light speed, turning it into a weapon of incredible destructive power. "Target is the Imperial supply depot at coordinates 77 Alpha," he announced to his crew. "Remember, we only get one shot before they find us and blow us up. Make it count." The tungsten rod struck the Imperial supply ship with the force of a nuclear weapon. The ship disintegrated instantly along with enough food, fuel, and ammunition to supply 10,000 Imperial soldiers for a month. Jake and his crew had exactly 17 minutes to evacuate their position before Imperial retaliation arrived. They scattered to hidden bunkers throughout the moon's interior, already planning their next attack. Emperor Thakmor himself reviewed the reports from the Earth campaign with growing concern. The Kethmoran Empire had never faced a situation like this. They had conquered species with superior technology, greater numbers, and more advanced civilizations, but they had never fought an enemy that turned warfare itself into a form of art. "Your Majesty," Admiral Korthax reported via secure communication, "the humans have demonstrated capabilities that were not apparent in our initial surveys. They appear to have been preparing for invasion for several generations." The Emperor studied the tactical summaries. The numbers were disturbing. Imperial casualties were mounting daily. Supply lines were under constant attack. Most troubling, the human resistance was growing stronger, not weaker as the war continued. "How is their morale?" the Emperor asked. "Sir, this is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the situation. Human morale appears to be improving. They seem to view our presence not as a conquest to be endured, but as a problem to be solved. They're treating this war as if it were educational." The Emperor was silent for several moments. In 800 years of Imperial expansion, no conquered species had ever described warfare as educational. On Earth, the human resistance had indeed turned the war into the largest military education project in their species' history. Every engagement was analyzed, every Imperial tactic was studied. Every weakness was cataloged and shared across their communication networks. Dr. Patricia Wong, the former heart surgeon who had become a weapons instructor, now coordinated intelligence sharing between resistance cells worldwide. She had access to data from thousands of encounters with Imperial forces, and she was beginning to see patterns. "They're predictable," she explained to a gathering of resistance leaders in an underground command center beneath the ruins of Geneva. "The Imperial forces follow standard procedures. They've been using the same tactics for centuries, probably because those tactics have always worked before." She activated a holographic display showing Imperial troop movements from the past month. "Look at this. Every time they take territory, they establish the same type of perimeter. Every time they face resistance, they respond with the same escalation pattern. They're not adapting to us because they've never had to adapt to anyone." Marcus Rivera, the construction worker who had become a resistance cell leader in Mexico City, studied the patterns. "So we use their predictability against them?" "Exactly," Dr. Wong replied. "We let them take territory. Then we show them why holding that territory will cost them more than it's worth." The human strategy was unlike anything in Imperial military history. Instead of defending fixed positions, they allowed Imperial forces to advance, then made the occupied territory uninhabitable through constant harassment, sabotage, and guerrilla attacks. Imperial soldiers found themselves governing populations that refused to cooperate in any way. Humans would smile and nod during the day, then sabotage Imperial equipment at night. They would appear to submit to Imperial authority, then disappear into underground networks that seemed to exist everywhere. Commander Veltar had established a headquarters in what had once been downtown London. The building was intact. His soldiers controlled a 10-block radius, and Imperial sensors showed no human military activity in the area. Yet every morning, he woke up to find that some piece of Imperial equipment had been sabotaged. Communication arrays would be filled with concrete. Vehicle fuel tanks would be contaminated with sugar. Weapons would be disassembled and reassembled incorrectly. Food supplies would be spoiled with carefully introduced bacteria. "Sir," his security chief reported, "we've increased patrols, installed motion detectors, and placed sensors on every piece of equipment." "The sabotage continues. How is this possible?" Feltar demanded. "Sir, we believe the humans are using utility tunnels, storm drains, and subway systems that our maps don't show. They seem to be able to move throughout the city without ever appearing on the surface." The commander reviewed security footage from the previous night. The recordings showed empty streets, no movement, no signs of human activity. Yet somehow, in a heavily guarded compound, surrounded by sensors and patrols, the humans had managed to sabotage a communications array, steal weapons from an armory, and leave behind graffiti that read, "We're still here." What Imperial intelligence didn't understand was that the humans had spent decades preparing not just for invasion, but for occupation. Every city had underground networks that connected homes, businesses, schools, and government buildings. Every neighborhood had hidden caches of food, weapons, and supplies. Every citizen had been trained in basic sabotage and resistance techniques. But the most dangerous aspect of human resistance wasn't their tactics or their preparation. It was their communication. Every Imperial defeat, every successful human attack, every example of Imperial incompetence was broadcast across human communication networks and beyond. The humans were not just fighting for Earth. They were broadcasting their resistance to every corner of the galaxy. Intelligence Officer Kexdai brought disturbing news to Admiral Korthax. "Sir, we've intercepted human transmissions that are being broadcast on frequencies used throughout Imperial space. They're sending detailed information about our tactics, our weaknesses, and our casualties to other species in the Empire." The Admiral reviewed the intercepted transmissions. The humans were broadcasting not just propaganda, but detailed military intelligence. They were sharing everything they had learned about Imperial forces with anyone who might be listening. "Why would they do this?" the Admiral asked. "Sir, the transmissions include messages that suggest the humans believe other species in the Empire might be inspired to resist Imperial rule." For the first time since the invasion began, Admiral Korthax felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of military service. Fear. Not fear of human weapons or tactics, but fear of human ideas. 1 year after the invasion began, Emperor Thakmor received reports that made him question everything he understood about Imperial power. The Earth resistance had not collapsed. In fact, it had grown stronger. But worse than that, the human broadcasts had begun to have effects across the Empire that no one had predicted. On Velthara, a crystalline world that had submitted to Imperial rule 400 years ago, something unprecedented happened. The Velthari began their first acts of rebellion in 4 centuries. Korthan was a crystal being who worked in the Imperial tribute factories, processing rare minerals for shipment to the Imperial core worlds. He had never questioned the order of things. His people had accepted Imperial rule because resistance seemed impossible. The Empire was too large, too powerful, too permanent. Then he heard a human transmission. "This is Dr. Patricia Wong, broadcasting from Earth," the voice said in perfectly translated Velthari. "We know you're listening. We know you remember what freedom feels like. We're not asking you to fight like we fight. We're asking you to remember that you have the right to say no." Korthan discussed the transmission with his work partner, Velsina. They talked quietly, carefully, afraid that Imperial monitors might detect their conversation. "Do you remember the stories our elders told?" Velsina asked. "Before the Empire came?" Korthan did remember. Stories of crystal cities that grew naturally from the planet's surface. Stories of Velthari who chose their own leaders, made their own decisions, lived their own lives. "The humans have been fighting for 1 year," Velsina continued. "The Empire still hasn't conquered them. Maybe the Empire isn't as strong as we thought." Within a month, productivity in the Velthari tribute factories dropped by 30%. Workers began arriving late, working slowly and making mistakes that contaminated mineral shipments. When Imperial supervisors demanded explanations, the workers simply said they were tired. Similar scenes played out across the Empire. On the aquatic world of Mordesh, underwater cities began experiencing technical difficulties that reduced their tribute payments. The Mordeshi, who had been model Imperial subjects for 3 centuries, suddenly seemed unable to maintain their underwater mining equipment properly. Zextai was a Mordeshi engineer who maintained the underwater tribute extraction systems. She had always taken pride in her work. keeping the machines running efficiently for Imperial quotas. But the human transmissions had given her new ideas. We don't have to break the machines. She explained to her fellow engineers during a carefully planned meeting in the deep ocean trenches where Imperial monitors couldn't detect them. We just have to make them less efficient. A component here, a calibration there. Nothing that looks like sabotage, just regular maintenance problems. The human strategy was working. By broadcasting their resistance, by sharing their tactics, by demonstrating that the Empire could be fought, humanity had planted seeds of rebellion throughout Imperial space. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The Zenfi. The Zenfi were the Empire's primary technology developers, a species of brilliant mathematicians and engineers who designed Imperial weapons, ships, and communication systems. They had never shown any interest in politics or rebellion. They seemed content to solve technical problems and leave governance to others. Dr. Quintar was a senior Zenfi engineer who designed targeting systems for Imperial warships. He had spent decades perfecting weapons that could destroy entire cities from orbit. His work had made the Empire's military dominance possible. Then he began receiving human technical broadcasts. The humans were sharing not just military intelligence, but scientific data. They broadcast detailed analyses of Imperial technology, including flaws and weaknesses that even Imperial engineers didn't know existed. "Look at this," Dr. Quintar said to his research partner, showing her a human analysis of Imperial shield generators. "These beings, with their primitive technology, have identified 17 ways to improve our defensive systems. They understand our technology better than we do." His partner, Dr. Melsara, studied the human data. "How is this possible? They've only been fighting us for 1 year. "Because," Dr. Quintar replied, "they've been studying everything. Every piece of equipment they capture, every Imperial system they encounter, every weakness they discover. They're learning faster than we're adapting." The Zenfi began to feel something they had never experienced: professional embarrassment. These primitive humans were demonstrating superior understanding of technology that the Zenfi had designed. Dr. Quintar made a decision that would change the war forever. Instead of trying to counter human technical improvements, he began incorporating them into Imperial systems. But he did so in ways that only he and his fellow Zenfi would understand. The improvements he made to Imperial weapon systems included subtle flaws that would cause them to malfunction at crucial moments. The upgrades he designed for Imperial communication systems included backdoors that could be exploited by resistance forces. The enhancements he created for Imperial shield generators included weaknesses that could be targeted by primitive human weapons. Within 6 months, Imperial forces across the galaxy began experiencing equipment failures at the worst possible times. Weapons jammed during combat. Communication systems failed during coordinated attacks. Shield generators collapsed when they were needed most. Imperial military commanders blamed the problems on battlefield conditions, enemy interference, or manufacturing defects. They never suspected that their own technology developers were sabotaging them. Admiral Korthax faced a crisis unlike anything in Imperial military history. Not only were his forces unable to conquer Earth, but rebellions were breaking out across Imperial space. His supply lines were under attack from worlds that had been peaceful for centuries. His equipment was failing with increasing frequency. His soldiers were losing confidence in Imperial superiority. "Your Majesty," he reported to Emperor Thakmor, "I must request permission to withdraw significant forces from Earth to address growing rebellions in the Outer Rim territories." The Emperor studied the reports with growing alarm. 17 worlds had declared independence in the past month. 43 others were experiencing civil unrest that required Imperial intervention. Production quotas were falling across the Empire as subject species found creative ways to resist Imperial demands. "How many worlds are affected?" the Emperor asked. "Sir, preliminary reports suggest that over 300 worlds are experiencing some form of resistance activity. The human broadcasts appear to have reached every corner of the Empire." The Emperor realized that the humans had achieved something no military force in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had turned their resistance into a virus that was spreading throughout Imperial space, infecting species that had been submissive for centuries with the idea that resistance was possible. On Earth, Dr. Patricia Wong received reports from across the galaxy with growing amazement. The human resistance had become something much larger than a fight for Earth's independence. It had become a galactic independence movement. "We're not just fighting for our world anymore," she announced to resistance leaders gathered in underground command centers around the globe. "We're fighting for every world that wants to be free." Marcus Rivera, now a senior resistance commander, studied intelligence reports from dozens of species across the Empire. The Velthari have reduced their tribute payments by 50%. The Mordeshi have gone on strike. The Zenfi are sabotaging Imperial equipment. It's working. The whole Empire is falling apart. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The children. 12-year-old Amy Chen, Sarah's daughter, had been living in underground shelters for over a year. She had learned to operate communication equipment, coordinate supply deliveries, and analyze Imperial tactics. Like thousands of other human children, she had grown up during the war and knew no other life. When Imperial forces managed to establish a communication link with human resistance leaders and demanded negotiations, Amy was the one who answered. "This is Amy Chen, speaking for the free people of Earth," she said. Her young voice broadcast across Imperial communication networks. "We've been listening to your reports. We know your empire is falling apart. We know your own people are turning against you." Admiral Korthax, expecting to negotiate with military commanders or political leaders, found himself talking to a child who spoke with the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "You can leave now," Amy continued. "Or you can leave later, but you will leave. The only question is how much of your empire you want to have left when you do." The transmission was heard throughout Imperial space. A human child speaking from a war zone had just told the Empire that its days were numbered. And across hundreds of worlds, billions of beings who had lived under Imperial rule for generations heard that message and began to believe it might be true. 4 years after the invasion began, Emperor Thakmor faced a reality that no Imperial ruler had ever confronted. The Kethmoran Empire was collapsing. The siege of Earth had become the longest military campaign in Imperial history. Worse, it had inspired the largest rebellion the galaxy had ever seen. 312 worlds had declared independence in coordinated uprisings that stretched Imperial forces beyond their breaking point. The Emperor stood in his throne room, studying reports that painted a picture of total systemic failure. The Velthari had stopped sending tribute entirely, and were actively helping other species rebel. The Mordeshi had weaponized their underwater cities and were launching attacks against Imperial shipping. The Zenfi had revealed that they had been sabotaging Imperial technology for 3 years. Most devastating of all, entire Imperial fleets were defecting to join the growing Free Worlds coalition. Admiral Korthax transmitted his final report from Earth orbit. "Your Majesty, I must inform you that continued operations in this system are no longer sustainable. Human resistance has not decreased after 4 years of combat. If anything, they have become more effective, more organized, and more determined." The Emperor reviewed the casualty reports, the supply shortages, the equipment failures, and the rebellion status updates. The Empire was hemorrhaging resources, territory, and credibility at an unprecedented rate. "What are your recommendations, Admiral?" the Emperor asked, though he already knew what the answer would be. "Your Majesty, I recommend immediate cessation of Earth operations and redeployment of all available forces to suppress rebellions in the core worlds. The humans have achieved their strategic objective. They have made conquest more expensive than abandonment. For the first time in 8 centuries, an Imperial ruler was forced to consider retreat. On Earth, the human resistance had evolved into something far beyond what anyone had imagined when the war began. The underground cities had become centers of innovation and learning. The resistance networks had become a global communication system that connected every human settlement on the planet. Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Forces, stood in the command center that had been built beneath the ruins of Geneva. Around her, displays showed not just the tactical situation on Earth, but the status of rebellions throughout the galaxy. "Incoming transmission from the Imperial flagship," her communications officer announced. Sarah looked around the command center at the people who had spent 4 years fighting for their world's freedom. Many of them had been civilians when the war began. Teachers, doctors, construction workers, students, parents. The war had turned them into something the galaxy had never seen. A species that fought not for conquest, but for principles. "Put it through," Sarah said. Emperor Thakmor himself appeared on the display. Sarah had expected to see anger or arrogance, but instead she saw something she had never seen in Imperial communications: uncertainty. Admiral Chen, the Emperor began, "I am prepared to discuss terms for Imperial withdrawal from your system." Sarah felt the weight of history in that moment. No species had ever forced the Empire to negotiate a withdrawal, but she also understood that this negotiation was about much more than Earth's freedom. "Your Majesty," she replied, "I appreciate your willingness to negotiate. But before we discuss terms, you need to understand something. We didn't fight this war to save Earth. We fought it to prove that freedom is not negotiable." The Emperor listened as Sarah continued. "You can withdraw your forces from our system, but that won't solve your real problem. Your empire is based on the idea that some beings have the right to rule over others without their consent. We've spent 4 years teaching the galaxy that this idea is wrong. That can't be undone. Around the galaxy, beings who had lived under Imperial rule for generations watched as a human leader explained to the Emperor why his empire was doomed. Every species in your empire has the right to govern themselves, Sarah said. Every world has the right to determine its own future. Every being has the right to be free. We're not asking you to grant these rights. We're telling you that these rights exist whether you acknowledge them or not." The Emperor realized that the humans had achieved something far more dangerous than military victory. They had won a philosophical victory that made Imperial rule impossible to sustain. Marcus Rivera, now a senior coordinator for the Global Resistance, watched the negotiation from his command post in Mexico City. Beside him stood his daughter Rosa, now 16 years old and a veteran communications specialist who had grown up during the war. "Papa," Rosa said, "do you think they'll really leave?" Marcus looked at his daughter, who had never known a world without war but had never known a world without hope. "They don't have a choice, mija. We've shown them that ruling people who don't want to be ruled is impossible." The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Empire offered Earth independence in exchange for an end to human broadcasts that were encouraging rebellion throughout Imperial space. The humans refused. Dr. Patricia Wong, now the head of the Free Earth Council, explained the human position to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, we can't stop other species from choosing freedom. We can't agree to be free while helping you keep others in chains. Freedom is not something you can compromise about." The Emperor made one final offer. "Admiral Chen, what if I offered to make humans partners in the Empire? You could help us govern other worlds, share in Imperial authority and resources." Sarah's response was immediate and final. "Your Majesty, we don't want to rule anyone. We want everyone to rule themselves." The Empire's collapse accelerated rapidly after that. Within 6 months, over 500 worlds had declared independence. Imperial fleets were either defecting to join the Free Worlds Coalition or simply abandoning their posts and returning home. The Zenfi revealed the full extent of their sabotage, providing detailed technical information that helped newly independent worlds defend themselves against remaining Imperial forces. The Velthari shared their crystal-growing technology with anyone who needed building materials. The Mordeshi offered their underwater cities as refuges for beings fleeing Imperial retribution. 1 year after the negotiations began, Emperor Thakmor transmitted a message that officially dissolved the Kethmoran Empire. The galaxy was suddenly free of the Imperial system that had dominated it for 8 centuries. But the humans understood that freedom was just the beginning. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before representatives of over 400 former Imperial worlds at the first Galactic Freedom Conference. The meeting was held on a neutral station in space, built cooperatively by dozens of species working together. "We gather here not as conquerors and conquered," Sarah began, "but as free beings working together to build something better than empire. We have proven that no one has the right to rule others without their consent. Now we must prove that free beings can cooperate without domination." The conference established the Free Worlds Covenant, a voluntary alliance based on mutual respect, trade cooperation, and collective defense. Unlike the Empire, membership was completely voluntary. Unlike the Empire, decisions were made by consensus rather than decree. Unlike the Empire, the goal was cooperation rather than control. Dr. Patricia Wong, now in her 70s, served as the first director of interspecies education. Her job was to help former Imperial subjects learn the skills needed for self-governance, democratic decision-making, economic cooperation, conflict resolution, and technological sharing. Freedom isn't just the right to make your own choices, she explained to students from dozens of species. It's the responsibility to help others make their choices too. 10 years after the war ended, Ambassador General Zexhai, the same Kethmoran who had delivered the original surrender demand to Earth, visited the planet as a representative of the Free World's Covenant. The former imperial world of Kethmor had become a founding member of the Covenant after its people voted to abandon imperial traditions in favor of democratic self-governance. He stood in a memorial park built where Geneva had once been destroyed by imperial bombardment. The memorial was simple, a wall with names of all beings who had died fighting for freedom, from every species, from every world that had participated in the rebellion. Sarah Chen, now retired but still active in interspecies diplomacy, walked with him through the memorial garden. "Do you ever regret it?" Zexhai asked. "The war, the destruction, the cost of your resistance?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Around them, human children played with young beings from dozens of different species. Above them, ships from hundreds of free worlds came and went, carrying trade goods, students, diplomats, and tourists. "We regret the necessity," Sarah replied. "We regret that your empire forced us to choose between freedom and peace. But we don't regret choosing freedom." They walked in silence for a few moments, then Zexhai spoke again. "What did you learn from the war?" "We learned that freedom is contagious," Sarah said. "Once beings understand that they have the right to be free, that knowledge spreads faster than any weapon. We learned that no empire, no matter how powerful, can survive once its subjects stop believing they deserve to be ruled." At the center of the memorial stood a simple monument with an inscription in over 800 languages.